Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today's screencast is going to focus on really what causes the Founding Fathers to call for what's known as either the Philadelphia Convention or the Constitutional Convention. So it's kind of a transition lesson from the weaknesses and the difficulties of the Articles of Confederation, and kind of leads into why they feel the need to basically reframe the government, rewrite the Constitution, and change the government from being run under the Articles of Confederation to a brand new constitution, which we currently have in our government today. So this is kind of some of the reasons for why. So we've talked about some of the economic problems, some of the major weaknesses of the Articles, but some events happened in the mid to late 1780s that really kind of pushed the Founding Fathers to decide that, yes, we need to totally scrap the Articles of Confederation. We need to call for a new convention. We need to sit down and write a brand new constitution for the United States. So that's what this screencast is going to focus on, why they decided to do this. And they really fall into a couple of different categories. So the first one really are the economic problems facing the nation. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here because we did this in class. But just to refresh our memories, they're dealing with major debt problem, both national and state level debt. They're dealing with inflation. So continental dollars, which were created during the American Revolution, is experiencing tremendous inflation within the country. They're dealing with a problem between hard currency, which is gold and silver, and soft currency, which is paper money. Certain people within the nation and foreign countries only want to accept hard currency. And then a lot of people in the United States only have soft currency. They only have continental dollars and paper money. And so this causes some big economic problems for the nation. And then overall, you're dealing with a problem between debtors and creditors. Remember, debtors are people who owe money, and they want to pay their loans in soft currency. They want to pay it in paper money. And you have creditors who are owed money, but they only want their money in hard currency, gold and silver. And so again, you have an imbalance here. And overall, all of this kind of leads to basically a depression within the United States economically. And the Articles of Confederation are fundamentally flawed in dealing with these economic problems. And so some people in the United States, pictured right here, one guy named Robert Morris, he's going to begin a movement known as the Nationalist Movement. And the movement is to try and strengthen the federal government. So that's why they call it the Nationalist Movement. They basically are trying to say, like, listen, economically speaking, the government cannot deal with these potential problems because it's not strong enough. It can't levy taxes. It can't regulate the currency. It can't put tariffs on imports and exports, which is another problem that I left out, where the British are flooding our markets with these cheap manufactured goods. And people led by Robert Morris and some other people are going to start this movement to say, like, we need to strengthen our federal government. We need to strengthen the national government in order to be able to stem our economic problems and fix our economic problems. So as the 1780s go on and the economy does not improve and these difficulties get worse, more people are going to kind of call and kind of be called to the nationalist movement. Now, just something to kind of note, in the 1780s, these people are referred to as nationalists. When we get into the late 1780s and into the 1790s, they're going to be referred to as federalists. So you just want to remember that you want to keep that in mind, that the nationalists of the 1780s are the federalists of the 1790s. But they're basically calling for the same general thing. They want to strengthen the federal government because they want to really focus on fixing the economic problems of the era. And so there's a growing movement within the United States during the time period. Now, they are dealing with tremendous economic problems like we talked about, and the Articles are fundamentally weak at dealing with this, but they're also dealing with tremendous diplomatic difficulties as well. So I'm going to go through the West just kind of briefly. This is more for period 7 who didn't get a chance to go through this in class. Periods 1, 3, and 5, you guys can kind of just kind of watch this as a refresher. But I'm just going to go through it briefly. So the West is one of the Articles of Confederation's main strengths, but it's important for settling this territory out here with the Northwest Ordinance and the Southwest Ordinance. But you also have to remember, we had big enemies here. We have the Spanish out here in the west, we have the British in the north. So it's a little bit different than our country now. You have nations who border us, who are threatening us, who would like to see us fail, would be more than willing to kind of aid the American Indians in fighting against the new American Republic, would be willing to kind of bring their troops in and hurt the United States. So one of our main goals is just trying to settle the West and to try and get people to move out to the West so that it kind of shores up our frontier borders there between the Spanish and the British. So we talked about this in class. Thomas Jefferson comes up with a plan where we kind of will populate the West. He wants to have 14 states. We never really take on Jefferson's idea. But what we do write is something called the Northwest Ordinance. And the Northwest Ordinance is a big deal because it helps to kind of populate the West, and it also creates a system for territories to become states. And that's really the key thing that was written under the Articles of Confederation. So if you look at this land out here in the Northwest and then in the Southwest, without the Northwest Ordinance, there wouldn't be a process for territories, possessions of the United States, to actually become fundamental equal players in the United States and to join the Union as a state. So, very big key piece of legislation. The 37 states that follow the original 13 into the Union, they all follow the guidelines set forth in the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. It has certain criteria for becoming a state: a population of 60,000 people. You have to have a democratic government. You have to apply for your statehood, and you have to be accepted. All these different criteria, but it sets a pathway for this happening. Now, this is important for the country, and like I said before, it's also important for shoring up our borders. British Canada is a hostile nation. The Spanish Southwest is a hostile nation. They're not friendly nations out there. And so Americans are dealing with some diplomatic problems. Diplomatically, we're not respected in the world. We're looked at as a weak country. We're looked at as a country that doesn't really have any allies. We're the only democracy or republic in the world. We're in a sea of monarchies. So the Spanish are a monarchy, the British are a monarchy, the French are a monarchy, all of Europe. There's really no potential allies there. Even the French, who are allied during the American Revolution, are not super friendly to us in the 1780s and the 1790s. And so we're dealing with trying to make treaties with these countries, and really they're trying to take advantage of the United States. A lot of them would like to see us fail because they like the land. They'd like a more friendly nation, a nation that has a similar government to them. So a good example of the hostility that we're dealing with is a treaty signed between the United States and Spain called the Jay-Gordikai Treaty. And this reflects two different things, I think, going on in the nation. We talked about this briefly at the end of class, the sectional division within the country. The South and the growing West and the Northeast and New England. So what you're looking at here, this is not a popular treaty. This is an effigy of John Jay. An effigy is like a dummy, and they're hanging the effigy in anger about the Jay-Gordikai Treaty because they are so angry about the treaty that they've created here. So to give you guys a little bit of explanation of what happened here, basically how it's seen is that John Jay, who's our foreign diplomat and dealing with Spain and trying to create these treaties, it falls along sectional lines. What happens is that they believe the Southwest, the Southerners and the Westerners believe that John Jay kind of sold out their interests. What the treaty said was that essentially they gave up the right to the Mississippi River in exchange for Spain opening up its ports in its colonies and in Spain itself to American merchants. Jay kind of looked at this and said, well, this is a win for the United States. We're actually going to get a trading partner. The British are being hostile to us. They're selling all our manufactured goods in the United States. They won't buy any American products or agricultural products. But that's not how Americans in the South and the West see it. How they see it is that John Jay sold out their interests here because they need the Mississippi to sell and to ship their products out. So, especially if you're going to move out into the Southwest territory here. And he says that they basically believe that he sold out their interest in favor of the interests of New England. So this is important, I think, not so much for the treaty itself, but the treaty itself shows the diplomatic weakness of it, because it's not a good treaty for the United States. And it shows how the Europeans are trying to take advantage of us as a new country and manipulate things to get advantages for them. What I think is more important about it, so that's one issue that's going on here. What I think is more important about the treaty is that it shows the sectionalism within the country. That's going to really grow in the 1790s into the 1800s, and then ultimately up until the Civil War. You have Southerners and, in this case, New England, but Northerners having different interests, and them seeing each other as potentially rivals within the nation is an important element here. So that's what we call sectionalism. So that's kind of a show of some of the diplomatic problems. Now, we're also having internal problems, which I guess you could categorize as military problems or political problems within the country. So an excellent example of this is dealing with a rebellion known as Shays' Rebellion. So Shays' Rebellion is led by a guy named Daniel Shays. It happens in Massachusetts. So to give you some of the background of it, Daniel Shays and some of his followers, a lot of them are American Revolutionary War veterans. And they're owed money, basically. They're not getting a lot of their pay from the American Revolution. They're also, a lot of these guys are farmers out in the western Massachusetts, and they're falling into, some of this issue with debtors and creditors. So a lot of farmers and a lot of these American Revolutionary War veterans, they owe money. They're debtors, okay? And so as we said before, debtors are getting paid, if they do get paid from the Continental government and under the Articles of Confederation, they're going to get paid in paper money. They owe money usually to bankers and wealthier merchants and people in the eastern part of Massachusetts. They want to pay them in paper money. These eastern interests and these eastern bankers only want to accept gold and silver coins, because for them, in order to trade with, say, Spain or Britain or France or a foreign country, they need gold and silver coins. So they're not necessarily going to accept their paper currency, and what starts to happen is they start to foreclose on a lot of these people's farms in western Massachusetts. Now, I think there's two key things happening here that you want to make a note of. Shays' Rebellion is yet another example of the Western-Eastern divide now in the new American nation, but that's a carryover from colonial time periods where you saw Westerners, like backcountry people, because remember, this is Western Massachusetts and Eastern Massachusetts. So kind of have like backcountry people, Western people having issues with Eastern, coastal people, coastal elites, wealthy elitist interests, bankers and merchants. And so it's very similar in certain ways to Bacon's Rebellion, the March of the Paxton Boys, some of these other Western-Eastern conflicts. And this won't be the last one that we'll talk about, but it's important to understand that there's a trend of that in American history, Western-Eastern conflicts. Second reason that it's important, and I think fundamental to the Articles of Confederation, is it shows a flaw in the Articles of Confederation, and it makes a lot of Americans pretty nervous about the situation. So Shays get some followers, and they start an uprising, a rebellion, and they do very much similar to Bacon's Rebellion. They try to march on the Capitol, try and basically cause havoc within Massachusetts. And what this highlights is that there is no national army to put this down, to put down the rebellion, to have a show of force. And it makes a lot of founding fathers pretty nervous because they're a brand new country. And they can't have rebellions constantly every time somebody has an economic problem or a social problem within the nation, because the nation can very much splinter. And our foreign enemies would love that. They'd love to have the opportunity to play one group of Americans off the other group of Americans. And so in particular, a lot of nationalists are very nervous about this. And in certain ways, this propels them to call the Constitutional Convention. One founding father who's very concerned about it is George Washington. And you're going to read one of his documents, either I think tonight or you read it last night, about how fundamentally nervous he is about potential rebellions like this occurring over and over within the country. So those three things, the economic, the foreign diplomatic issues and like the political internal rebellions are kind of what ultimately lead to calling the Constitutional Convention.